This very amateur production will show how to sample a core at consecutive 1mm intervals or 2mm intervals, or really at whatever intervals you are so inclined to sample at. The materials you are going to need ahead of time before you start sampling are ideally pre-labeled sample bags. That way you're not trying to label your bags in between samples. I prefer Whirlpacks, but you can use whatever works best for you. You're going to need a bunch of glass slides, particularly if your sediments are stiff, because you will wind up breaking several of these during the process. You're going to need some type of template, or I should say ruler, and what you're looking at here, and I'm not sure it's going to show up clearly in the video, is a millimeter lined, or 2 strips of millimeter lined piece of paper that I created in Adobe Illustrator and scaled so that when I printed them out on my particular printer they came out to exactly a millimeter per line. You're going to need a straight edge of some type. I find drafting triangles work pretty well, but really any straight edge will do that doesn't extend too far off the sides of the core you're eventually going to be sampling. A beaker of water to rinse off your slides between samples. Paper towels. And a core. I apologize for the jerkiness of this video. I'm moving the camera around as I'm trying to shoot this. So, try to zoom in here, not on the paper towels, but on the core itself. I'm assuming you've already scraped across the surface of the core to get a nice clean surface. And what you will want to do, and actually I'm going to pause this video and drop the tripod so that this is zoomed in a little bit better. And we're back. The first thing you're going to want to do is, if you're using the paper templates, soak them in water so that they will stick to the edge of the core, and put one down on one side. Be really careful to make sure that you've got your uppermost millimeter the same on both sides, otherwise you will wind up with different numbers on each side of your core. And while you might not notice that right off the bat, you will notice it at some point, at which point your sampling becomes very confused. So it's always best to make sure you're starting right off at the same point at the beginning. These particular templates, actually the 0 is not labeled, but is here. I gave myself a little extra room to play just when I was making these guides within Adobe Illustrator. If you would like the file that I use for this, just email me at david.black@stonybrook.edu, and Stonybrook is spelled STONYBROOK. There is no E in there, which most people think there is. To begin sampling, take your straight edge and lay it across your first millimeter or 2mm, or whatever interval you really want to sample at. Since I'm showing consecutive millimeters here, that's what we're going to do. Wet your glass, at least one of the glass slides. A wet slide is much easier to sample with than a dry slide, and very carefully, with one edge of the slide against your straight edge, the short edge of the slide against the core barrel, and always in contact with the core barrel, scrape off 1 millimeter. And using your other slide, hopefully this will be in focus, scrape it off into your sample bag. Put the next sample back into your beaker, or hopefully you've got an assistant. This goes a lot faster with one. Clean off the slides, which is the jingling you're hearing, in the beaker of water. If you really want to be careful, you can wipe the slides down with a paper towel in between each sample. Shift your straight edge down by exactly 1 millimeter. And repeat the process. As long as you keep the long edge of the slide in contact with the straight edge and the short edge of the slide in contact with the core barrel, you will get very consistent sampling volumes. Inevitably, there's going to be some variation, in some cases much as, unfortunately, if you're really rushing this and not paying as much attention as one should, as much as 25% variation between individual samples. But if you are being careful about things, you get amazingly consistent samples this way. I'm just going to do really the first ½ centimeter here because there's no point in doing a video of shooting the sampling of this entire core once you've seen about the first 5 times. Most people get the hint in terms of how this is done. But if there are questions, I can certainly be reached at the email address I mentioned a little earlier, and I will be more than happy to respond. In stiffer mud, in older cores, as one gets away from the top of the core where things are a little soupier, one will start breaking slides. It's almost inevitable. As long as you're careful, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think I've ever cut myself in the process when a slide's broken. You tend to break slides more often if you hold the slide when you're scraping up near the top rather than having fingers across the entire slide to provide support. But even when doing that, at some point, and I really hope I'm not going to have to demonstrate this for you, a slide will break. It happens. That's why I've got the whole box of them ready. Place the slide and move on. So that's the first ½ centimeter. And I'm going to move the camera so you can see the face, well, the top of the core, so to speak. I'm actually going to take the camera off the tripod to do this. Sorry for the Blair Witch Project jerkiness here. Not sure this is going to come into focus or not. Give it something to focus on. There we go, kind of. As you can see, the scraped face of the core is flat and perpendicular to the core barrel. There's a little bit of sediment left within the side core barrel that you inevitably miss when scraping across. I recommend every centimeter or two to go through with a paper towel and just remove any remaining sediment in the core barrel, such like what we have here, just to prevent cross-contamination. Otherwise, this is a really simple technique. You don't need a core extruder to do high-resolution sampling. Once you get the hang of this, you can do a couple samples per minute, and the result is one can go through really an entire, I wouldn't want to do a piston core this way, although I have. One can certainly go through a box core, a multi-core, or even a short gravity core in a relatively short time frame. Cost effective, it's cheap, and it produces really good results. If you're dealing with varved sediments and your core went in at a slight angle, just adjust the millimeter templates, angle them such that your straight edge is parallel to your laminations, and then you can sample directly across laminations, which is something you can't do with a core extruder. You'll mix laminations that way. So again, this is a very effective technique. It's easy, and once you get the hang of it, it's no trouble at all.